October 8, 1871, 9 p.m. A fire starts on DeKoven Street, southwest side of Chicago. Not unusual. The city sees 20 fires a week. Wooden buildings, dry autumn, strong winds. The fire department responds within minutes. But 17 hours later, 4 square miles of Chicago are gone. The business district, the courthouse, the waterworks, 17,000 buildings. 300 people dead. 100,000 homeless. This isn't a story about a cow kicking a lantern. That's the myth history sold you. This is a story about a system that looked modern, looked prepared, looked tested. Until the moment it wasn't. This is the story of the city that nearly burned because of one wrong assumption. That the system would work when it mattered most. Let's establish what Chicago looked like in October 1871. Population, 300,000. Growing faster than any American city except New York. Timber capital of the world. Grain capital. Meatpacking center. Railroad hub connecting east and west. The city is making fortunes overnight. Real estate speculators are buying land in the morning and selling it at profit by evening. But that growth has a cost. Speed over safety. Profit over planning. The construction, 36 miles of wooden plank roads. 59 miles of wooden sidewalks. 650 miles of wooden buildings packed so tight you can reach from one window and touch the building next door. The building code, revised just 2 years earlier, allows wooden structures up to 4 stories if the exterior walls are brick or stone. But the framing, the floors, the roofs, all wood. The city is a vertical forest. The fire department, 17 horse-drawn steam engines. State of the art. Can pump 400 gallons per minute when connected to hydrants with adequate pressure. 2 hook and ladder trucks for rescue operations. 185 firefighters divided into shifts. On any given night, maybe 60 are on duty. That's 1 firefighter for every 5,000 residents after dark. For comparison, modern fire safety standards recommend 1 firefighter per 1,000 residents, minimum. But Chicago City Council isn't worried. They've invested in technology. The new Telegraph-based fire alarm system, installed in 1868 at a cost of $20,000. 172 alarm boxes across the city, concentrated in commercial districts. Pull the lever, the box sends a unique numerical code via telegraph wire to central dispatch. The dispatcher reads the code, consults a map, and sends the nearest engine company. On paper, response time, 4 to 6 minutes from alarm to arrival. Revolutionary for its time. Except for one detail no one talks about in the planning meetings, in the budget reports, in the newspaper features praising Chicago's modern infrastructure. The system has never been tested during a major fire. Only false alarms. Kitchen fires. Chimney fires. Small warehouse blazes contained in under an hour. No one knows what happens when the system faces real stress. When multiple alarms trigger simultaneously. When the telegraph operator is receiving codes faster than he can write them down. No one knows because no one asked. October 8th arrives. Chicago hasn't seen significant rain in 3 months. The summer was hot. The autumn is hotter. September recorded temperatures in the 90s. By early October, the vegetation in city parks is brown and brittle. The Chicago River, which usually runs high enough to accommodate cargo ships, is showing its bed in some sections. Humidity on October 8th, 22%. For context, the Sahara Desert averages 25%. Chicago is drier than a desert. Wind, sustained 15 miles per hour from the southwest, gusting to 30. The kind of wind that pushes smoke horizontal. That turns embers into projectiles. The entire city is kindling waiting for a spark. And at 9:05 p.m. it gets one. 137 DeKoven Street. A barn behind the O'Leary cottage. Catherine O'Leary, her husband Patrick, and their 5 children live in the cottage. They rent out the barn to a neighbor who keeps a cow. The barn is 12 feet by 14 feet. Wooden frame. Hay storage in the loft. Kerosene lantern hanging from a beam for evening milking. The fire starts there. Oh. No one knows for certain. The cow story, the image everyone remembers, a cow kicking over a lantern, was fabricated by Michael Ahern, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, 2 weeks after the fire. He admitted the fabrication in 1893, but by then it was canon. The lie was better than the truth, which was, no one saw it start. Evidence suggests a neighbor, probably Daniel Sullivan, who lived across the street, was in or near the barn smoking a pipe. A dropped ember. An accident. Sullivan denied it. But his testimony to the inquiry commission placed him near the barn within minutes of ignition, and he had fresh burns on his hands. Regardless of cause, the fire begins. And within 6 minutes, it spreads to 4 adjacent buildings. All wood frame. All tightly packed. The flames move faster than men can run. 9:12 p.m. First alarm reaches Fire Station 6, 3 blocks away. Engine Company 5 responds. They arrive with a steam pumper, 6 men and 2,000 feet of hose. Standard procedure: connect to the nearest hydrant, pump water, drown the fire before it spreads. They connect. The engine builds pressure. The hose fills. But when the nozzle opens, the stream is weak. Barely reaches the second story. The firefighters check the hydrant. Flowing but low pressure. They try a second hydrant 1 block over. Same problem. Here's why. Chicago's water mains are made of hollowed-out wooden logs, bored through the center and fitted together with iron collars. It's cheaper than iron pipe. And under normal conditions, adequate. But 3 months of drought have shrunk the wood. The joints are leaking. And the pressure, which should be 60 pounds per square inch at the hydrant, is down to 30. 30 psi can barely fight a kitchen fire. It's useless against a barn fire that's already jumped to 4 buildings. 9:23 p.m. Second alarm. The fire has crossed DeKoven Street. It's now burning both sides. 8 buildings fully involved. The heat is so intense that wooden fences 1 block away are smoking. 9:37 p.m. Third alarm. Now the fire is moving northeast, driven by the wind. 16 blocks are burning. Here's where the first assumption breaks. The Telegraph alarm system. Chicago's fire alarm boxes are numbered. Box 42. Box 73. Box 112. Each number corresponds to a specific street corner. Pull the lever, the box transmits its number in Morse code. The central telegraph operator, stationed at the courthouse, receives the signal, writes down the number, checks the master map, and dispatches the appropriate engine. But the system has a design flaw. It can only process 1 signal at a time. If 2 boxes transmit simultaneously, the signals overlap. The operator hears a garbled mess. He can't distinguish box 42 from box 73. He has to wait for 1 signal to finish before the next begins. By 9:45 p.m., 6 alarm boxes have been pulled. The operator is receiving overlapping codes. He writes down what he can decipher, 472391. But he doesn't know which numbers go together. Is it box 47 or box 47? Is it box 239 or boxes 2, 3, and 9? He makes his best guess. He dispatches engines to 5 different locations. 3 of those locations are wrong. The engines arrive at empty streets. Meanwhile, 2 blocks over, buildings are collapsing and no one is there. The system that was supposed to save time is now wasting it. And no one at Central Dispatch realizes the problem because they don't know what's happening at the scene. The telegraph system is one way. Alarm boxes send signals in. But they can't send information back. 10:15 p.m. Fire Chief Robert Williams arrives. He's been sleeping when the first alarm came in. By the time he dresses, saddles his horse and rides to the scene, the fire is already out of control. He assesses the wind direction, the speed of spread, and the available resources. He has 60 firefighters on duty across the city. 15 are already here. The rest are responding to smaller fires triggered by embers. He has 11 steam engines operational. 6 are at the scene. The others are spread thin. He makes a decision: create a firebreak. Demolish buildings in the fire's path using gunpowder. Standard practice in major fires. Deny the fire fuel. Let it burn itself out. But there's a problem. Chicago's building code, revised in 1869 after a warehouse explosion killed 4 workers, restricts gunpowder storage within city limits to small quantities for construction use only. Large stockpiles are kept at Fort Sheridan, 12 miles north, for military purposes. Williams sends a courier on horseback to request the powder. Round-trip time, minimum 90 minutes, probably 2 hours given the condition of the roads and the late hour. By the time the wagons return with the gunpowder, the fire will have moved miles beyond the proposed firebreak location. Williams abandons the plan. He shifts strategy. Protect critical infrastructure. If the gasworks fail, the city loses streetlights. If the waterworks fail, the city loses all firefighting capacity. He orders all available engines to concentrate on 2 points: the gasworks on the west side and the waterworks on the north side. Everything else is expendable. 11 p.m. The fire crosses the Chicago River's south branch. This should be a natural firebreak. The river is 90 feet wide at this point. But embers are landing on the opposite shore, igniting wooden docks, warehouses, and shanties built right up to the water's edge. The fire is now in the business district. the financial heart of the city. Banks, brokerage houses, newspaper offices, hotels, theaters, all built with brick facades to look permanent, to look fireproof. But behind the brick, the support beams are wood. The floors are wood. The roofs are wood. Midnight. The gasworks catch fire. The plant stores coal gas in large cylindrical tanks for distribution through underground pipes. When the flames reach the tanks, they rupture. Explosions echo across the city. Fireballs rise 200 feet. The heat is so intense that windows shatter 3 blocks away. Every streetlight in Chicago goes dark. The city is now fighting a firestorm in total darkness except for the light of the fire itself. 12:30 a.m. October 9th. The waterworks, located on the north side near the lake, are still operational. But the pumps are straining. Water pressure across the city is dropping. The wooden mains underground are burning. Not visibly, but the heat from above is charring them, causing them to crack and leak. The pumping station's chief engineer notices the pressure gauges falling. He increases pump speed to compensate. But it's not enough. For every gallon pumped, 2 gallons are leaking through damaged mains. 1:15 a.m. The courthouse, located in the center of the business district, catches fire. The building serves as the hub for fire department coordination. It houses the central telegraph office. And its bell tower, the highest point in the city, is used to manually ring alarm bells when the telegraph system fails. The fire reaches the tower. The bell, cast iron, weighs 2,000 pounds. The heat causes the support beams to fail. The bell falls 6 stories, crashing through the floors and melts in the basement. The sound, witnesses later report, was like a cannon firing followed by a long, low moan as the metal deformed. Communication collapses. No telegraph. No bell. Fire companies across the city no longer know where to go. They're operating on visual cues only. Look for smoke, follow it, hope you arrive in time. 1:40 a.m. Firebreak attempt number 2. Wealthy business owners on State Street, watching the fire approach, hire private crews to demolish buildings ahead of the flames. They're not waiting for city approval. They're using ropes, axes, and muscle. The plan: pull down every building for 2 blocks, create a gap the fire can't cross. But the fire is moving faster than they can work. And even if they succeed, the wind is carrying embers a quarter mile ahead, starting new fires behind the firebreak. The concept of a firebreak assumes the fire moves in a predictable line. This fire doesn't. Here's the second assumption that breaks: that fire behaves according to models. In normal conditions, fire spreads by direct contact. Flame touches wood, wood ignites. Firefighters can predict the path. But in extreme conditions, fire creates its own weather. Heated air rises rapidly, creating a low-pressure zone at ground level. Cooler air rushes in from all sides to fill the void. This accelerates the wind. The accelerated wind feeds more oxygen to the fire. The fire burns hotter. Hotter fires create stronger updrafts. Stronger updrafts pull in more wind. It's a feedback loop. The fire isn't spreading. It's leaping. Embers the size of your fist are landing 3 blocks ahead, igniting roofs, igniting trees, igniting anything combustible. You can't firebreak a fire that jumps. 2 a.m. The waterworks fail. Not because the building burns. Because the underground wooden intake pipes, which draw water from Lake Michigan, crack under thermal stress. Lake water stops flowing to the pumps. The pumps, now running dry, overheat and seize. Every hydrant in Chicago goes dry. Firefighters are standing in the street with hoses connected to dead hydrants, watching the pressure drop to 0. Some try to form bucket brigades using water from the river. But the river is contaminated with ash and debris, clogging the steam engine intake valves. The fire department is now fighting a firestorm with buckets of dirty water. 3:30 a.m. The fire crosses the main branch of the Chicago River. It's now consuming the north side. This is residential. Working-class neighborhoods. German immigrants. Irish immigrants. Swedish immigrants. Families who saved for years to buy small wooden homes. Those homes are gone in minutes. 4 a.m. The Tribune building, supposedly fireproof, catches fire. The walls are limestone. The floors are supported by iron beams. It cost $180,000 to build with fireproofing in mind. But the windows are wood-framed. The interior offices are wood-paneled. The furniture is wood. When the fire enters through the windows, it finds plenty to burn. The iron beams, exposed to temperatures exceeding 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, lose their structural strength. They sag. They twist. The floors collapse inward. The building doesn't burn down. It burns in. The limestone shell remains standing, but everything inside is ash. Reporters abandon their desks mid-sentence. Typewriters are left with half-finished articles. Some accounts describe molten metal dripping from the ceiling as they fled. 5 a.m. The Potter Palmer Hotel, the city's crown jewel, evacuates. The hotel cost $3.5 million to build, completed just 1 year earlier. It has 6 stories. Hydraulic elevators. Indoor plumbing. Gas chandeliers. It's marketed as fireproof because the exterior is marble and the main staircase is iron. But the guest rooms have wooden floors. The walls are wood-framed with plaster. The furniture is wood. When the fire breaches the building, it spreads floor by floor. Guests flee in nightclothes, some barefoot, carrying jewelry, documents, whatever they can grab. The hotel burns in 40 minutes. The iron staircase, the feature that was supposed to save lives, becomes a chimney. Heat rises through the stairwell, accelerating the fire's vertical spread. 6 a.m. October 9th. Dawn. The fire is visible from Milwaukee, 90 miles north. Refugees are streaming out of Chicago in every direction. Some walk. Some ride in wagons. Trains leaving the city are overloaded, passengers crammed into freight cars, clinging to roofs. Families are pushing wheelbarrows loaded with possessions. Mattresses. Chairs. Framed portraits. One witness describes a woman carrying a bird cage with a dead canary inside, overcome by smoke hours earlier, but she won't leave it behind. The roads heading west are jammed. No order. No coordination. Just panic. 7 a.m. Firebreak attempt number 3. The city engineer, watching from a safe distance north of the fire, proposes using Lake Michigan as a natural barrier. The lake is a mile east of the business district. If they can demolish every building between the fire and the lake, create a clear zone, the fire will burn itself out when it reaches water. Demolition crews move in. But once again the fire moves faster. And the plan assumes the fire will reach the lake and stop. It doesn't account for embers landing on wooden docks, wooden boats, wooden piers. The lake is lined with combustible structures. The fire burns right to the water's edge and keeps finding fuel. Bam. Fire Chief Robert Williams, who has been awake for 23 hours, admits defeat. He orders all fire companies to fall back. Stop fighting the buildings. Focus on evacuation. The priority is no longer saving property. It's saving lives. Some firefighters refuse the order. They keep pumping even though the hoses are dry. They keep pulling down buildings even though the fire is already past them. They don't know what else to do. Noon October 9th. The fire is still burning. It has consumed the entire business district, most of the north side and parts of the south side. 3.3 square miles. 17,450 buildings. And here's the detail that changes everything. The fire only stopped because the wind shifted. Not because of firefighting efforts. Not because of firebreaks. Not because someone finally figured out how to make the system work. The wind, which had been blowing northeast at 30 miles per hour for 15 hours straight, suddenly dropped to 8 miles per hour and shifted northwest. The fire, which had been racing toward the lake, lost its momentum. It burned into areas already consumed. It ran out of fuel in the direction it was moving. By midnight, October 10th, the fire is out. Not extinguished. Out of material. 300 deaths. That's the official count published by the city 2 weeks later. But the Inquiry Commission's report, released months later, questions that number. Many bodies were never recovered, incinerated completely. Families who lived on the north side, entire households disappeared. No remains. No records. Just empty lots where homes used to be. The commission estimates the true death toll is closer to 500, possibly 600. But confirming that is impossible. The city's birth and census records burned in the courthouse. 100,000 people homeless. 1/3 of the city's population. They're living in tents provided by relief organizations. In the basements of burned-out buildings. In churches outside the fire zone. Winter is 6 weeks away, and there's no plan for housing them. Property damage, $200 million in 1871 currency. That's roughly $4.2 billion in today's money. But that figure only accounts for physical structures. It doesn't include lost inventory, lost business, lost contracts, lost future revenue. Chicago was scheduled to host the National Industrial Exposition starting October 15th. The largest trade show in the country. Cancelled. Exhibitors from Europe, from the East Coast, from California, all canceling. Hotels were booked solid. Restaurants had ordered supplies. Printers had produced programs. All wasted. Insurance companies refused to pay. They claim the fire falls under act of God clauses. Or they argue the city's negligent building codes invalidate coverage. Lawsuits drag on for years. Some businesses never recover financially. And the fire department? Blamed. Chief Williams faces calls for resignation. Newspaper editorials accuse him of incompetence. The Inquiry Commission's report is scathing. One passage, the department operated under the illusion of preparedness. Drills were conducted regularly. Equipment was maintained in good condition. But no one asked the critical question, what happens when everything fails at once? And because no one asked, no one prepared. The result was not a failure of effort. It was a failure of imagination. Here's the hidden mechanism that explains why Chicago burned. The fire response system was designed for isolated, predictable incidents. One building catches fire. Alarm box is pulled. Engine responds. Fire is contained within one block. That scenario was drilled repeatedly. The system handled it well. But the system assumed fires would always be isolated. That alarm boxes would trigger one at a time. That water pressure would remain constant. That firebreaks would work because fire spreads in straight lines. That fireproof buildings would resist flames long enough for firefighters to arrive. Every one of those assumptions was based on normal conditions. And none of them were tested under stress. When the stress test arrived on October 8th, every assumption broke simultaneously. The alarm system couldn't handle multiple signals. The water mains couldn't handle sustained high demand. The firebreaks couldn't account for wind-blown embers. The fireproof buildings couldn't withstand interior fires fed by wooden framing. It wasn't one failure. It was a cascade. Each broken assumption made the next failure more likely. The alarm system fails, firefighters arrive at the wrong locations, the fire spreads unchecked, water demand spikes, water pressure drops, hoses go dry, firefighters can't suppress smaller fires, those fires merge into the main blaze grows hotter, embers travel farther, new fires start beyond the firebreak fails, critical infrastructure is threatened, resources are diverted, residential areas are left undefended, those areas burn, refugees flee, roads clog. Coordination collapses. One domino tips. Then another. Then all of them. And because no one had tested the system under real stress, no one knew where the breaking points were. No one had asked, what if the alarm system is overwhelmed? What if the water pressure drops? What if the wind is too strong for firebreaks? What if multiple catastrophic events happen at the same time? Those questions weren't asked in 1868 when the alarm system was installed. They weren't asked in 1869 when the building code was revised. They weren't asked in 1870 when the fire department requested additional funding and the city council approved half the amount. They were only asked after 300 people were dead. Here's the misconception most people have about the Great Chicago Fire, that it was an unstoppable force of nature. That no fire department in the world could have contained it. That the city was doomed the moment the first flame appeared. Wrong. A properly designed system could have contained it. Not easily. Not without losses. But contained. That system would have required three things Chicago didn't have. First, redundancy. Backup water sources. If the wooden mains fail, switch to emergency cisterns filled by pumping stations independent of the main supply. If the telegraph alarm system overloads, switch to a manual runner system where messengers on horseback carry location information. If the primary firebreak strategy fails, have secondary and tertiary strategies ready. Chicago had none of that. They had one alarm system. One water supply. One firebreak strategy. When each failed, there was no backup. Second, realistic stress testing. The alarm system was tested with single pulls under ideal conditions. It was never tested with 10 simultaneous pulls during high wind while half the telegraph lines were down. The water system was tested at normal demand. It was never tested at maximum demand with compromised mains. The firebreak strategy was tested on paper with theoretical fire spread models. It was never tested in real conditions with 30-mile-per-hour winds. If Chicago had conducted stress tests, they would have discovered the breaking points before the fire did. And they could have designed workarounds. Third, enforcement. Chicago had a building code. It required brick or stone exteriors for large structures. It limited building heights based on materials. It mandated minimum distances between structures in certain zones. But enforcement was lax. Inspectors were underfunded. Developers bribed officials. Exceptions were granted for economic reasons. By October 1871, hundreds of buildings were technically in violation. But no one forced compliance because compliance was expensive and violations were profitable. If Chicago had enforced its own codes, the fire would have spread slower. Not stopped, but slower. And slower might have been enough. All of that was possible in 1871. The technology existed. The knowledge existed. But implementing it required money, political will, and the ability to imagine a worst-case scenario before it happened. Chicago had none of those. And when the worst case arrived, the city burned. October 11, 1871. Less than 24 hours after the fire is extinguished, Chicago begins rebuilding. Not planning. Rebuilding. Actual construction. Lumber arrives by rail from Wisconsin. Bricks arrive from Indiana. Workers arrive from surrounding towns looking for jobs. Within 1 week, temporary wooden structures are going up in the burned district. Merchants are reopening in tents. The stock exchange resumes trading in a borrowed building on the outskirts. Within 1 month, architects are submitting designs for the new business district. And these designs are different. Steel framing instead of wood. Masonry load-bearing walls. Fire-resistant materials. William Lou Barron-Jenny, an architect who will later design the first true skyscraper, submits a proposal for buildings that use steel frames to support the structure, allowing the exterior walls to be non-load-bearing. This makes buildings lighter, taller, and more fire-resistant. By 1885, Chicago completes the home insurance building, the world's first steel-frame skyscraper. 10 stories. Fireproof. It becomes the template for modern urban architecture. The fire codes are rewritten. Wooden structures are banned in the central business district. All new buildings must use brick, stone, or steel framing. Water mains must be cast iron, minimum 6-inch diameter. Fire alarm systems must have manual backup protocols. Firebreaks must be at least 60 feet wide in high-density areas. The fire department is reorganized. The number of firefighters is increased to 300. The number of steam engines is doubled. A secondary water pumping station is built on the south side, ensuring redundancy if the main station fails. Fire alarm boxes are redesigned to send coded signals that prevent overlap. Chicago becomes a model of urban fire safety. Other cities study its reforms. New York adopts similar codes. Boston upgrades its water system. San Francisco, which will face its own fire disaster in 1906, looks at Chicago's mistakes and tries to avoid them. But here's the irony. It took a catastrophic failure to force the changes that should have been implemented from the start. Every reform, every innovation, every safety measure adopted after the fire could have been adopted before. But before they were optional. After they were mandatory. The Inquiry Commission's final recommendation, buried on page 73 of their 200-page report, reads, "No system, however modern in appearance, should be considered reliable until it has been tested under the worst conditions it was designed to prevent. If a system has never faced a true stress test, it is not a proven system. It is an assumption waiting to fail." That recommendation was ignored in 1872. Most cities didn't adopt comprehensive fire safety reforms until they faced their own disasters. And some never did. 3 lessons from the city that burned. 1. Untested systems are fantasies dressed as infrastructure. Chicago had a modern fire department on paper. Professional firefighters. Steam engines. Telegraph alarm systems. Fireproof buildings. But paper doesn't stop fires. Real-world performance does. And real-world performance is only proven under real-world stress. If a system has never been tested in the conditions it's designed to handle, it's not a system. It's a hypothesis. And betting lives on a hypothesis is not preparedness. It's negligence. 2. Cascading failures don't wait for solutions. When the alarm system failed, firefighters improvised. When the water mains failed, they improvised again. When the courthouse burned, when the gasworks exploded, when the wind shifted, they kept improvising. But improvisation can't outpace cascading failure. By the time they realized the entire system was collapsing, the fire was miles ahead. You can't catch a cascading failure. You can only design systems resilient enough to absorb the first failure without triggering the second. That requires redundancy, backup protocols, and the willingness to over-engineer for scenarios that seem unlikely. Chicago didn't over-engineer. They built to minimum specifications. And when the minimum wasn't enough, there was nothing left. 3. Cost-cutting in safety is deferred catastrophe. Chicago saved money by using wooden water mains instead of cast iron. They saved money by limiting the number of alarm boxes. They saved money by allowing wooden construction in dense neighborhoods. They saved money by underfunding the fire department. And then, in 36 hours they lost $200 million. The math doesn't work. Safety isn't an expense. It's an investment. And every time a city, a company, a system chooses to defer that investment, they're gambling that the worst-case scenario will never arrive. But worst-case scenarios don't care about budgets. They arrive when they arrive. And when they do, the cost of not preparing is always higher than the cost of preparing would have been. The Great Chicago Fire killed at least 300 people. Probably more. It left 100,000 homeless. It destroyed a third of the city. But it also killed something else. The myth that systems which look modern are the same as systems which work under pressure. Chicago rebuilt. And in rebuilding they created the blueprint every major city follows today. Steel frame construction. Fireproof materials. Redundant water systems. Backup communication networks. Fire codes enforced by law, not by suggestion. But those innovations came too late for Catherine O'Leary, whose barn burned first and whose name was slandered by a lie about a cow. Too late for the families on the north side who lost everything and never recovered. Too late for the firefighters who stood in front of a wall of flames with dry hoses and broken alarms, watching a system collapse around them. They trusted a system that looked prepared, looked advanced, looked tested. Until the moment it mattered. And in that moment the system didn't just fail. It vanished. That's the story history tried to bury under the myth of a cow and a lantern. Not the spark. The system. The one that looked so good on paper. The one that had never faced a real test. The one that killed 300 people because no one asked the question that mattered. What happens when everything fails at once? Next time we open a file on something different. When the system doesn't fail by accident. When the vulnerabilities aren't discovered during a disaster. When someone maps the gaps deliberately and decides to exploit them. When infrastructure becomes a weapon. If you want to see how deep these breaches really go, subscribe. Because the files only get darker from here. I'll see you in the next file.